The news broke with the force of a thunderclap, reverberating through every corner of Venezuela. It swept across the capital like a tropical storm, darkening the mood and casting a shadow over the city's already troubled streets. On the morning of October 8, 2025, Venezuelans awoke to headlines that sent a shiver of fear through the nation. Radios crackled with urgent updates, and social media feeds exploded with speculation and dread. The United States had moved a formidable military force into the southern Caribbean, just over the horizon, close enough to be seen on satellite images, close enough to be felt in the pit of every Venezuelan stomach. For a country battered by years of economic collapse, political turmoil, and international isolation, the arrival of American warships felt like the final chapter in a long, painful saga of confrontation. The sense of uncertainty was overwhelming. Stark images flooded the media, destroyers slicing through blue waters, their hulls bristling with weaponry, and fighter jets roaring overhead in tight formation. The world watched as the U.S. Navy flexed its muscle, sending a message that could not be ignored. The silhouette of an aircraft carrier loomed against the sunset, a symbol of overwhelming power and a warning of what might come next. Inside Miraflores Palace, President Nicolás Maduro convened emergency meetings. The corridors buzzed with the hurried footsteps of generals and ministers, their faces etched with worry. The government's public response was defiant, with officials vowing to defend the nation at any cost. But behind closed doors, alarm was growing, and the reality of the threat was impossible to ignore. This was no routine patrol. It was a clear and unmistakable show of force, a demonstration that the United States was prepared to act decisively if provoked. On the streets and in homes, the question on everyone's lips was no longer if the Americans would act, but when and how. Conversations were hushed, eyes darted nervously, and rumors spread like wildfire. The shock was amplified by recent U.S. military action in Iran, where American forces had struck with speed and precision. The message from Washington was clear: the era of hesitation was over. The psychological impact on ordinary citizens was profound. Old fears of invasion, once dismissed as distant nightmares, now felt terrifyingly real. Families gathered around television, searching for answers, while others took to the streets, anxious and uncertain about what the future might hold. The Caribbean, once a symbol of tranquility and escape, had become the flashpoint for a crisis with consequences that could ripple across the entire hemisphere. The world was watching, and Venezuela stood on the edge of the unknown. The sheer scale of the American military presence sent shockwaves through Caracas and reverberated across the globe. For many, it was a display of force not seen in the region for decades, a reminder of the United States' unmatched ability to project power far from its own shores. The Pentagon responded with overwhelming might, dispatching a formidable naval group, 8 warships, state-of-the-art destroyers bristling with weaponry, and a massive aircraft carrier serving as the fleet's command center. The sight of these vessels cutting through the turquoise waters was both a warning and a statement of intent. The message was unmistakable. Overwhelming firepower now loomed at Venezuela's doorstep, just miles from its territorial waters. The presence of such a force signaled that the United States was prepared for any contingency. In the skies, the U.S. Air Force deployed squadrons of F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico, placing advanced air power within striking distance of Venezuela's capital. These stealth aircraft, capable of precision strikes, added a new dimension to the threat. Beneath the waves, intelligence sources confirmed the presence of a nuclear-powered submarine prowling the Caribbean depths. Its silent patrol added an invisible, ever-present danger, one that could strike without warning. On board the ships, thousands of U.S. Marines stood ready. Trained for rapid intervention and amphibious assault, these ground troops could be deployed at a moment's notice, prepared for any escalation or direct combat. This was more than a simple blockade. It was a show of force, a preparation for a spectrum of military options, from enforcing sanctions to launching a full-scale intervention if necessary. The speed and coordination of the American buildup stunned military analysts. Within days, the region was transformed into a theater of high-stakes maneuvering, demonstrating U.S. readiness and unwavering resolve. Venezuela's military, though determined, now faced a technologically superior adversary. Surrounded and monitored at every turn, their every move was tracked by advanced surveillance and reconnaissance systems. Around the world, governments and citizens watched as the most powerful military force on Earth waited just off Venezuela's coast, the fate of a nation hanging in the balance. The U.S. buildup wasn't just for show, it came with deadly action. In recent weeks, the U.S. military struck vessels near Venezuela, killing suspected traffickers. The Pentagon called these narco-terrorist strikes, shifting from law enforcement to open military force. President Trump claimed the targets posed imminent threats, justifying lethal action without trial. The U.S. now treats suspected traffickers as enemy combatants, bypassing traditional legal processes. Critics warn this sets a dangerous precedent, blurring the line between crime and war. For Venezuela, these strikes are provocations and rehearsals for wider conflict. The Caribbean has become a live fire zone, where policing and warfare dangerously overlap. The legal groundwork for this aggressive posture was laid months before the warships arrived, setting the stage for a dramatic escalation in U.S. foreign policy. Behind closed doors, advisors and legal experts debated the scope of presidential authority, searching for ways to expand the military's reach beyond traditional boundaries. In August 2025, President Trump signed a sweeping directive authorizing the U.S. military to directly target Latin American drug cartels. This order was not just a policy shift, it was a signal to the world that the United States was prepared to use overwhelming force and that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. With a single signature, counter-narcotics operations were transferred from law enforcement agencies to the Department of Defense. The Pentagon now had the authority to plan and execute missions that would have previously been unthinkable, blurring the lines between policing and warfare. The administration declared that the United States was in a state of armed conflict with designated cartels. This legal framing allowed the use of lethal force against so-called unlawful combatants, a term that gave the military broad discretion in targeting suspected cartel members. In a further escalation, the U.S. government branded Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his top officials as narco-terrorists, accusing them of running a criminal enterprise. The State Department doubled the reward for Maduro's capture, making him one of the world's most wanted men. This legal strategy blurred the distinction between crime and war, providing justification for military strikes not just against drug traffickers, but potentially against the Venezuelan state itself. The Caribbean became a flashpoint, with U.S. forces poised for action. Critics, including human rights groups and legal scholars, warned that this doctrine effectively created a global battlefield, where the normal checks and balances on military power were dangerously weakened. They argued that such sweeping authority risked civilian lives and undermined international law. The debate over the legality and morality of these actions is no longer just theoretical. It's unfolding in real time across the Caribbean, where the presence of U.S. warships and military aircraft signals that the consequences of this new doctrine are already being felt on the ground and in the air. Confronted by the U.S. Armada, President Maduro responded with defiance and mobilization. He condemned the deployment as imperialist aggression, urging Venezuelans to unite for survival. The military was placed on high alert, tens of thousands of troops readied for conflict. Defense officials touted their vigilance, tracking U.S. aircraft near the coast. Government warnings grew sharper, promising fierce resistance and a protracted war if invaded. Maduro's team also waged a diplomatic campaign, alleging false flag plots and seeking to cast Venezuela as a victim. The narrative: Venezuela would resist, and any invasion would come at a high cost. Venezuela's preparations went beyond the military, permeating society with a sense of looming war. Nationwide civil defense drills simulated attacks and chaos, testing emergency responses. Civilian militias were mobilized, training in first aid and firearms to defend infrastructure. The strategy: a nation in arms, ready for asymmetrical warfare and guerrilla resistance. The government aimed to make any invasion costly and unwinnable for the U.S. Public drills and propaganda unified supporters, but deepened dread among ordinary citizens. Exhausted by years of crisis, Venezuelans now faced the added fear of war. The country braced for an attack that felt more likely with each passing day. The crisis drew sharp international reactions, exposing deep geopolitical divides. Russia and China condemned the U.S. buildup, warning of regional instability and backing Maduro. Inside Venezuela, the threat of intervention split society. Some opposition figures welcomed U.S. action, others warned of disaster. Critics predicted a guerrilla war and regional chaos if the U.S. intervened. The Maduro government painted pro-intervention opposition as traitors, while the international community remained divided. Many condemned Maduro's rule, but few supported a US-led war. The diplomatic landscape was volatile, with every move met by unpredictable reactions. With warships on the horizon, the world wondered what would happen next. Experts saw several risky paths: a gradual escalation with airstrikes, or a dangerous bluff meant to force concessions. Airstrikes would target command centers and infrastructure, aiming to cripple Maduro's regime. Special forces raids could follow if Maduro refused to step down. Some argued the buildup was political theater, but the risk of accidental conflict was real. De-escalation seemed unlikely, requiring outside mediation and deep concessions. Mistrust ran deep, making peaceful resolution remote. The momentum was toward confrontation, not compromise. As of October 8, 2025, the Southern Caribbean sits on a knife's edge. The standoff has created a powder keg, with the risk of catastrophe growing daily. Venezuelans, already suffering, now face the terror of war. Civil defense drills and propaganda remind them their country could become a battlefield. The crisis is a stark reminder of how quickly tensions can spiral into military disaster. The world watches, hoping for a path back from the brink. For now, the Caribbean is calm, but the storm could break at any moment.